we've obviously been advocating for something like this for a while, and so we started down the process of trying to do something more on a private entity. So we've got some structure of bylaws and mission statement and things that we could very readily share with everybody. We obviously weren't tied directly to the city because we were going down the 501c3 path. There are so many different grant processes out there that we could apply for and to get funding for as a government entity. You either have to be a government entity or a 501c3. So we could absolutely take advantage of that if the city is willing to support in helping the grant writing process. It's obviously not something I am an expert at. I'm good at reading them, but not writing them. There's been some initiatives as a city that we've talked about that we want to help move forward. We want to encourage microchipping. These people could help to volunteer and organize to help microchip clinics. We could, if this was a city-sponsored entity, we can more closely partner with animal services and help to support them, which as an external entity, we weren't allowed to have that direct connection. So I see a lot of very quick and immediate things that they could do to support the city. Start small. Some things are free. A microchip clinic and checking to see if your animal chips information is still current, that's free. That's just time and resources spent. Versus getting the grant funding process, that's gonna take some time and we can build up from there. And yes, I'm well aware that I'm probably gonna be the liaison for that one too.
You think?
And I would agree with Laura that she be the liaison for that.
Yeah.
And I would echo Bill and Laura. I do think it's a great opportunity for the citizens to get together around something that obviously there's a lot of passion around. I think we've learned our lessons with the Inclusion Council, and very positive lessons around education and advocacy, and having that group be the conduit of ensuring that, you know, our citizens are made aware of inclusion events that are happening in the city and advocating for that. It is important, to Bill's point, that we have a very clear charter, because I think that's some of the lessons learned early on with the Inclusion Council in terms of what did we actually own as opposed to what did we advocate for. And so I think that's going to be really critical, that we understand what this committee actually owns versus what they're advocating and educating and celebrating. So I absolutely would support that with the right charter.
So I'm just gonna piggyback on that really quick. We had this long discussion in the Inclusion Committee that they were struggling with every single event, every single multicultural celebration. Then it almost became, well, is the Inclusion Committee gonna pay for it? Are you gonna run it? Are you gonna, and that was kind of like beyond scope of what they were doing, but they were clearly there to support and help promote and put it on social media and show up and you know, do all those kinds of things. So to Angelia's point, you know, all these different activities, it's gonna be, okay, which ones of the, if any, would the city pay for? Which ones are we partnering with? Maybe there's a vet that will donate, you know, all those kinds of things would be something that we'll have to.
But Lynn's raising their hand, so we're in.
We're absolutely happy to help sponsor microchip clinics or be a place where people can come and do that.
Great.
At least.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, the only other question I'd have, and this goes back to how it's structured. The Inclusion Committee and the Veterans Advisory Committee right now are both ad hoc committees, and while they do have structure, they are a little looser in that structure than our typical boards and commissions process. John's laughing, but he knows it's true. So I guess my only question, and this isn't something we have to answer today, I'd leave it to staff and Laura to help out with this, is does it start out as an ad hoc committee that's a little more fluid, which requires a resolution of council, or does it start as more of the permanent boards and commissions where we have to appoint members? Because those are two really kind of different things.
What's the inclusion? That's ad hoc?
It's ad hoc.
Inclusion's ad hoc right now.
I mean, this is my first pass, is that's where we start.
Okay.
Because that worked really well, because it's gonna take trial and error to kind of find our legs, right? Just like that one did.
Yeah.
And then you start kind of shaping it, and it may end up, because that one may end up being a formal one at some point.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I think it may kind of grow up to that at some point.
And I'll bring that up, because right now, Jason's working on the written structure for that one, but on this, to follow our current orders, we'd have to start out with at least something, and then it can obviously be modified, but They are two very different structures, so.
So is the ad hoc, is that just you appoint them all?
No, not,
No.
well, not the way our new, the way the
City
new ordinance
Secretary's
is.
trying to tell you.
Yeah.
So our current ordinance that you guys just revised last year, defines what an ad hoc citizen committee is. It also defines that those ad hoc committees have to apply the Open Meetings Act, which means there has to be posted agendas, there has to be posted minutes. You have to abide by that open meetings law. So saying something is an ad hoc committee of the city, based on our definition that we outlined in the ordinance last year, we have to be very careful of those because those committees that you just named are not in that spectrum.
They should be.
We'll follow up on that conversation.
Yeah.
They should be.
Duly noted, Christie.
Okay.
Cause if you're talking about applying for grants, they have to be. You'd have to put this into that.
To answer your question, we would come up with a collective appointment process for all of us, regardless of.
I would just say, I mean, I think anytime you have more citizen input in some place where they're passionate about it and, they're obviously experts and you're from both sides of any issue, I think this is gonna be really helpful for council, so.
Well, anytime we put a committee, you know, obviously it commits staff resources, but it sounds like there's enough support here to, you know, move forward in that direction, so. Obviously I know Laura is interested as a liaison, usually we have two, is there another council member that this issue particularly rises to the surface as?
I go back to the question of if this is an appointed board and commission, then we don't have liaisons. We don't have liaisons to planning and zoning, parks and rec, et cetera. We do with inclusion and veterans advisory because they're ad hoc.
Well, I think that's the direction we're going.
So, right, which is the discussion that Christie just said about the minutes and
We'll
whatnot.
talk about that separately.
But I think it makes sense for a new committee to have a liaison, so that we don't.
I guess we don't
Yeah,
necessarily
I'm
have
fine
to
with
have
it.
two, but if there's anyone else, I guess think about it cause we're gonna have to go, once it's sworn in and relook at all, you know, we have to reappoint our legislative, so you don't have to raise your hand tonight, but, you know, if this is one in particular that you would have involvement in, be thinking about it.
What is the time frame to get something like this going? I've never been part of one.
I would say a goal would, be to have it ready where people could put it on their normal board application.
So that's,
And so apply during July.
Christie's
appointment
having a
in
heart
August.
attack right now because she's so far down that road right now.
We're getting brand new software, but we can add it, but we would need to have it formed and added by July first, so we're fighting just to get the software up and running by July first with all our other predetermined.
I think you could have a placeholder that they could check they're interested, even if we don't have it fully flushed out, as far as what they're applying for. But I think we have enough to give them, people some guidelines as far as if you apply for this is what it's gonna look like, and, you know, and then be ready for, you know, to maybe start in August or September, probably September realistically. When do we appoint? We appoint in August,
We appoint in September and they start October first.
October first, okay,
So October first would be the term, but the second meeting in September will be your appointment.
okay.
We will take an effort at drafting that resolution that is required and making the stipulations and everything else we let it work with.
I think that's a reasonable timeline,
Or
especially
anybody else.
considering things slow down during the summer, to just say, hey, let's start it up October first. You know, through our normal appointment process and you can apply for it.
Well, Christie, I guess it's hypothetical. What if we model this like, FBAC or the inclusion committee at first versus an appointment process?
You could do that.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that you guys appoint people to those committees currently,
Right?
because it's not considered technically city committee,
Right.
hypothetically.
To get started with, I mean, to take some of the pressure off of city staff, why not simply create as one of your mayor's ad hoc committees and Laura can be the
That's
liaison?
the ordinance change
That's the
last
ordinance
year.
change.
Okay,
FVAC
but-
and that's what I was trying to say, FVAC and inclusion are supposed to fall under the ordinance as ad hocs in order to get staff commitments.
That was some
the
good
whole
government
purpose
put
of
in
the-
place.
That was the whole purpose of trying to
I did not support.
redefine everything last year. Because we had
Good
to-
government that works.
He doesn't support a lot.
I mean, we tried to avoid that with that, but that is a conversation you said you want to have another time, so.
Well, I mean, we've got some time, so I'd rather have some clear direction. I mean, I don't, doesn't matter to me. I particularly wasn't interested in the new ordinance revision where we're putting so much red tape and bureaucracy on things for ad hoc committees that, but I understand why council wanted to do that. So,
And a lot of that was looking forward to things that could go wrong in the future to avoid people that weren't as functional government as we are. There's six of us.
And it was also to ensure that not any one person or group of people tried to establish a committee that would then try to go get staff
I know we don't have to
resources.
we don't have to redebate it. I'm just saying now
Without
we're
it
seeing our
being
first,
right.
we're seeing our first iteration of good government at work,
Well, a
so.
lot of that's state laws that we hadn't had incorporated before that we had to incorporate this go around.
You always have to drop that on us.
Sorry.
So then what would be what are our allowed processes to appoint a committee to an ad hoc?
Well, Ryan, do you wanna take this?
Yeah, so-
Okay.
So the ordinance that was adopted last year allows for an ad hoc committee to be appointed by the mayor with input from the rest of the council or by the council as a whole. Those are the two pathways to adopt a new ad hoc committee. And so there is a provision in the ordinance that says you do not have to follow the appointment process that applies to standing boards and commissions. So you could elect not to go through the formal process and appoint whomever you wished, if it is an ad hoc committee. You could, however, go through that formal appointment process if you wanted to. If not, maybe.
So what's y'all's pleasure on this as far as starting an ad hoc? Do it more the informal route or the formal route?
Informal.
I'm fine with informal. Purpose of the ordinance was just to help define what the roles and responsibilities were, so.
I think informal's a good step one.
I would at least like to communicate what the path to formal would be. So I'm fine with informal if we say, but here's our plan to make it formal. Eventually.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a broader discussion, because the Inclusion Council does not have a formal path, so if we're getting ready to, take this particular initiative and make it formal, then it opens the door for discussion about why not Inclusion Council or FVAC or anything, again, nobody wants to add red tape, but, I think personally, as you think about a board or commission, there is a degree of legitimization and validity that inherently is baked into an official board and commission that is not with an ad hoc committee, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's just how I see it. So if we're gonna validate one group versus the other, then we need to go back and look at all of our ad hoc committees and determine how do we take it to the next step. So I think it's a broader discussion.
So the inclusion committee was the impetus for the revisions to the ordinance, because the question came up, how do we create another committee?
Right.
And we realized the one paragraph that was in the ordinance was woefully insufficient to actually do anything with. So they were the impetus, and you're right, they need to be formalized. The other thing is, ad hocs are formal, recognized committees.
I get it,
The
I get it,
definition
but
of
I get
ad
it
hoc in
as
the
a
ordinance is-
progression of validity, so.
But FVAC, it has been recognized by council for years as an ad hoc.
I get it, I just think that they are looked at differently. I hear what you're saying, but I think they're looked at differently.
And the purpose of the ad hoc was a defined purpose or time period. And FVAC and Inclusion Committee are defined purposes that are very, very specific versus Parks and Rec or P and Z or whatnot, or well, P and Z
I don't
is a
disagree with
state
what you're
law.
saying, I just think
So,
it's a bigger discussion.
I understand, just
Yeah.
a little bit of the history of how we got there.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could have a work session later in June, is our work session pretty much spoken about the different committees and where we are with committees, or back to the governance, because the governance is how we got here.
Governance was supposed to be working on it, but we've been hung up on another ordinance.
Correct. So why can't we just say it's an informal ad hoc committee until further discussion, so that we don't kick the can down the.
I think that's
I support that.
Now, the second question is,
I can't, it's gotta be in writing.
Well, it can't be an informal ad hoc committee, it can be an informal committee.
To be recognized, it should follow the ordinance process, and it can be an ad hoc, but it needs to have that resolution that creates it.
And to your point, if we wanted to do grant funding by the city, we have to have that status.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be the longest lead time of getting this built up into doing something more productive.
And it doesn't have to be a formal appointment process. Chrissy's already addressed that, so if staff can create the resolution that establishes it and at least some basic parameters to start with, we can still, it's still an informal appointment process.
That's okay.
so the second question is feedback on, if we want the people that are gonna be appointed to have input into the formation process. Or is it staff go through the formation process and then you appoint? So the inclusion committee, we started with the members and they very much had their fingers and molded the whole shape of it through their input, and they really defined that alongside city staff, so that we could follow that model, whether informally appointed and part of that initial process. Or do you prefer staff to have it done, have the document signed, ready, this is what they are, and now we're appointing people to say, you're appointing to this.
My gut reaction is we let them, similar to the inclusion committee, because that relieves some staff resources, specifically. But obviously having somebody that's, reviewing and supporting, and we have to approve it before it's finalized.
I would agree with that. I mean, you give the people who are passionate about it the ability to shape it.
With the parameters that we,
Right.
there's some
Yeah.
things that we're just not, yeah.
Ultimately, we will, the final bite, where we vote on the finished product.
Right.
So then, since there seems to be an agreement on that, then it sounds like we'll actually need to select people sooner than later. So, with plenty of time to, probably before that timeline, if we wanna execute by October 1st, so. With enough time to advertise, so appoint in June, second meeting in June? How many people?
How many does inclusion have? 7?
No, I don't think they have 7, I think they
Yeah,
have
it's like
3 or 5.
five.
But
Yeah.
no more than 7, because no other board has more than 7.
I would say basically, that my recommendation is we start it with every council member having one appointee. And that's it. With the agreement, obviously, everyone votes on every, so I may nominate that someone, that doesn't mean they get on it, right? Everyone still has to, this entire council has to vote for each person.
Yeah, because we did that with the charter
We
review
learned our
committee
lesson.
one year, that didn't work
I
out.
was gonna say, there's a lesson behind that, that I didn't need to witness.
Oh, I
Everyone
get
feel
it.
comfortable about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
fine.
7 people, everyone appoints one person, assuming support of the majority of the council, second meeting in June, they're gonna help shape what it's gonna become.
Have a primary and all.
Yes. And for some of you, maybe 2 alternates, no.
Is that directed at me?
No, probably me.
Alright, I think we accomplished a lot today.
How do they apply?
Well, if we're doing.
We're each applying, so we all will be using our own, some of us, it may be making one phone call to that one person we know we want to appoint. So, I mean, it's up to us in this process that we're gonna.
I have a feeling we'll be getting
advertise.
some emails from this room,
Yeah, that's
people that
it.
are interested, so.
And also, remember, I have a board that we are basically dissolving because the city can take over this, so I have 6 people that are willing to step up and help, if you need a person.
Okay. Alright, good work. I think we accomplished a lot. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Bill, second by Brian, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, that motion